In this moment from the Master and Margarita, a theatre performance spirals into chaos. As money falls from the sky and illusion reveals more than anyone expects. Welcome to Chapter Breaks, short literary escapes. Classic audio pills for your commute, bedtime unwind, or a break anytime. At Chapter Breaks, we carefully select and curate iconic passages from classic novels, scenes that are powerful, memorable, reflective, and a joy to listen to. Whether it's a timeless first chapter, a dramatic turning point, or a magical moment, each episode offers you the essence of great literature, one short escape at a time. This chapter break is The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov, 1967. Chapter 12, Black Magic Revealed. An Evening of Illusions. A brief introduction before listening to the chapter. In a crowded Moscow theatre, anticipation gives way to unease as the mysterious Professor Woland and his peculiar entourage take the stage. What begins as a harmless display of conjuring quickly transforms into something far more unsettling, a spectacle that exposes not only tricks of perception, but the hidden desires and follies of the audience itself. Banknotes rain from the ceiling, laughter turns to frenzy, and reality begins to fracture. As the performance escalates, vanity, greed, and curiosity are laid bare under the dazzling lights of the stage. What seems like entertainment becomes something closer to revelation. Between satire and the supernatural, Bulgakov crafts a scene both absurd and unsettling, where illusion is more revealing than truth, and where the boundary between performance and reality dissolves completely. This episode invites you into a theatre where nothing is quite as it seems, and where every spectacle carries a deeper, more unsettling meaning. We are about to take our seats and watch the curtain rise. Now let's open the page together. Your chapter break begins now. Chapter 12. As the warning bells rang, inquisitive people were peeping into the star dressing room. Among them were jugglers in bright robes and turbans, a roller skater in a knitted cardigan, a comedian with a powdered white face, and a makeup man. The celebrated guest artiste amazed everyone with his unusually long, superbly cut tailcoat and by wearing a black domino. Even more astounding were the black magician's two companions, a tall man in checks with an unsteady pince-nez, and a fat black cat, which walked into the dressing room on its hind legs and casually sat down on the divan, blinking in the light of the unshaded lamps round the makeup mirror. With a forced smile, which only made him look acidly disagreeable, Rimsky bowed to the silent magician, sitting beside the cat on the divan. There were no handshakes, but the man in checks introduced himself smoothly as the assistant. This gave the treasurer an unpleasant shock, as there had not been a word in the contract about an assistant. Grigory Danilovich inquired stiffly where the professor's equipment might be. "Why, bless you, my dear sir," replied the magician's assistant. "We have all the equipment we need with us now. Look, eins, zwei, drei." Flourishing his long, knotty fingers in front of Rimsky's eyes, he made a pass beside the cat's ear and pulled out of it Rimsky's gold watch and chain, which until that moment had been sitting under the treasurer's buttoned jacket in his waistcoat pocket, with the chain threaded through a buttonhole. Rimsky involuntarily clutched his stomach, the spectators gasped, and the makeup man, glancing in from the corridor, clucked with approval. "Your watch, sir? There you are," said the man in checks. Smiling nonchalantly, he proffered the watch to its owner on his dirty palm. "I wouldn't sit next to him in a tram," whispered the comedian cheerfully to the makeup man. But the cat put the watch trick in the shade. Suddenly getting up from the divan, it walked on its hind legs to the dressing table, pulled the stopper out of a carafe with its forepaw, poured out a glass of water, drank it, replaced the stopper, and wiped its whiskers with a makeup cloth. Nobody even gasped. Their mouths fell open, and the makeup man whispered admiringly, "Bravo!" The last warning bell rang, and everybody, excited by the prospect of a good act, tumbled out of the dressing room. A minute later, the house lights went out. The footlights lit up the fringe of the curtain with a red glow, and in the lighted gap between the tabs, the audience saw a fat, jolly, clean-shaven man in stained tails and a grubby white dicky. It was Moscow's best-known compere, George Bengalski. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," said Bengalski, smiling his boyish smile, "you are about to see." Here Bengalski broke off and started again in a completely different tone of voice. "I see that our audience has increased in numbers since the interval. Half Moscow seems to be here tonight. Do you know, I met a friend of mine the other day and I said to him, 'Why didn't you come and see our show? Half the town was there last night.' And he said, 'I live in the other half.'" Bengalski paused for the laugh, but none came, so he went on. "Well, as I was saying, you are about to see a very famous artiste from abroad, Monsieur Woland, with a session of black magic. Of course we know, don't we?" Bengalski smiled confidentially. "That there's no such thing, really. It's all superstition. Or rather, Maestro Woland is a past master of the art of conjuring, as you will see from the most interesting part of his act, in which he reveals the mysteries of his technique. And now, ladies and gentlemen, since none of us can bear the suspense any longer, I give you Monsieur Woland." Having said his feeble piece, Bengalski put his hands palm to palm and raised them in a gesture of welcome towards the gap in the curtain, which then rose with a soft rustle. The entry of the magician with his tall assistant and his cat, who trotted on stage on his hind legs, pleased the audience greatly. "Armchair, please," said Woland quietly, and instantly an armchair appeared on stage from nowhere. The magician sat down. "Tell me, my dear faggot," Woland inquired of the check-clad buffoon, who apparently had another name besides Koroviev, "do you find the people of Moscow much changed?" The magician nodded towards the audience, still silent with astonishment at seeing an armchair materialize from nowhere. "I do, Messiah," replied Faggot Koroviev in a low voice. "You are right. The Muscovites have changed considerably. Outwardly, I mean, as too has the city itself. Not just the clothes, but now they have all these, what do you call them? Tramways, cars? Buses," prompted Faggot respectfully. The audience listened intently to this conversation, assuming it to be the prelude to some magic tricks. The wings were full of actors and stagehands, and among their faces could be seen the pale, strained features of Rimsky. Bengalski's face, lurking in a corner of the stage, began to show consternation. With an imperceptible raise of one eyebrow, he seized the opportunity of a pause in the dialogue to interject. "Our guest artiste from abroad is obviously delighted with Moscow's technological progress." This was accompanied by a smile for the stalls and a smile for the gallery. Woland, Faggot and the cat turned their heads towards the compere. "Did I say I was delighted?" the magician asked Faggot. "You said nothing of the kind, Messiah," replied the latter. "Then what is the man talking about?" "He was simply telling lies," announced the checkered clown in a loud voice and for the whole theatre to hear, and turning to Bengalski, he added, "Did you hear, you liar?" There was a burst of laughter from the gallery as Bengalski spluttered, his eyes popping with indignation. "But naturally I'm not so much interested in the buzzers and telephones and such like." "Apparatus," prompted Faggot. "Precisely, thank you," drawled the magician in a deep bass, as in the much more important question, "Have the Muscovites changed inwardly?" A vital question indeed, sir. In the wings, glances were exchanged, shoulders shrugged, banker's table marked 1,000 rubles. His neighbours crowded round as he picked at the wrapping with his fingernail to find out whether it was real money or a stage prop. "My God, it's real money!" came a joyful shout from the gallery. "I wish you'd play cards with me if there've any more packs like that one," begged a fat man in the middle of the stalls. "Avec plaisir," replied Faggot. "But why should you be the only one? You shall all take part. Everybody look up, please. 1. A pistol appeared in his hand. 2. The pistol was pointed upwards. 3. There was a flash, a bang, and immediately a cascade of white pieces of paper began to float down from the dome above the auditorium. Turning over and over, some were blown aside and landed in the gallery, some fell towards the orchestra pit or the stage. A few seconds later, the shower of money reached the stalls and the audience began catching it. Hundreds of hands were raised as the audience held the notes up to the light from the stage and found that the watermarks were absolutely genuine. Their smell left no doubt. It was the uniquely delicious smell of newly printed money. First amusement, then wonder seized the entire theatre. From all over the house, amid gasps and delighted laughter, came the words, "Money, money." One man was already crawling in the aisle and fumbling under the seats. Several more were standing up on their seats to catch the drifting, twisting banknotes as they fell. Gradually, a look of perplexity came over the expressions of the police, and the artistes backstage openly pressed forward from the wings. From the dress circle, a voice was heard shouting, "Let go, it's mine! I caught it first!" Followed by another voice, "Stop pushing and grabbing or I'll punch your face in!" There was a muffled crash. A policeman's helmet appeared in the dress circle, and a member of the audience was led away. The excitement rose and might have got out of hand if Faggot had not stopped the rain of money by suddenly blowing into the air. Two young men, grinning purposefully, left their seats and made straight for the bar. A loud buzz filled the theatre. The audience was galvanized with excitement, and in an effort to control the situation, Bengalski stirred himself and appeared on stage. With a tremendous effort of self-mastery, he went through his habitual motion of washing his hands, and in his most powerful voice began, "We have just seen, ladies and gentlemen, a case of so-called mass hypnosis, a purely scientific experiment demonstrating better than anything else that there is nothing supernatural about magic. We shall ask Maestro Woland to show us how he did that experiment. You will now see, ladies and gentlemen, how those apparent banknotes will vanish as suddenly as they appeared." He began to clap, but he was alone. A confident smile appeared on his face, but the look in his eyes was one of entreaty. The audience did not care for Bengalski's speech. Faggot broke the silence. "And that was a case of so-called fiddlesticks," he declared in a loud, goatish bray. "The banknotes, ladies and gentlemen, are real." "Bravo!" abruptly roared a bass from high up in the gallery. "This man," Faggot pointed at Bengalski, "is starting to bore me. He sticks his nose in everywhere without being asked and ruins the whole act. What shall we do with him?" "Cut off his head," said a stern voice. "What did you say, sir?" was Faggot's instant response to this savage proposal. "Cut off his head? That's an idea. Behemoth!" he shouted to the cat. "Do your stuff. Eins, zwei, drei." Then the most incredible thing happened. The cat's fur stood on end and it uttered a harrowing meow. It crouched, then leapt like a panther straight for Bengalski's chest and from there to his head. Growling, the cat dug its claws into the compere's glossy hair, and with a wild screech it twisted the head clean off the neck in 2 turns. 2,500 people screamed as one. Fountains of blood from the severed arteries in the neck spurted up and drenched the man's shirt front and tails. The headless body waved its legs stupidly and sat on the ground. Hysterical shrieks rang out through the auditorium. The cat handed the head to Faggot, who picked it up by the hair and showed it to the audience. The head moaned desperately. "Fetch a doctor!" "Will you go on talking so much rubbish?" said Faggot threateningly to the weeping head. "No, I promise I won't," croaked the head. "For God's sake, stop torturing him." A woman's voice from a box suddenly rang out above the turmoil, and the magician turned towards the sound. "Well, ladies and gentlemen, shall we forgive him?" asked Faggot, turning to the audience. "Yes, forgive him, forgive him!" The cries came at first from a few individual voices, mostly women, then merged into a chorus with the men. "What is your command, Messiah?" Faggot asked the masked professor. "Well now," replied the magician reflectively, "they're people like any others. They're over fond of money, but then they always were. Humankind loves money, no matter if it's made of leather, paper, bronze or gold. They're thoughtless, of course, but then they sometimes feel compassion too. They're ordinary people. In fact, they remind me very much of their predecessors, except that the housing shortage has soured them." And he shouted the order. "Put back his head." Taking careful aim, the cat popped the head back on its neck, where it sat as neatly as if head and body had never been parted. Most amazing of all, there was not even a scar on the neck. The cat wiped the tailcoat and shirt front with its paw, and every trace of blood vanished. Faggot lifted the seated Bengalski to his feet, shoved a bundle of money into his coat pocket and led him off stage, saying, "Go on, off you go. It's more fun without you." Gazing round in a daze and staggering, the compare got no further than the fire brigade post and collapsed. He cried miserably, "My head! My head!" Among those who rushed to help him was Rimsky. The compare was weeping, snatching at something in the air and mumbling, "Give me back my head, my head. You can have my flat, you can have all my pictures, only give me back my head." An usher ran for the doctor. They tried to lay Bengalski on a divan in his dressing room, but he resisted and became violent. An ambulance was called. When the unfortunate compare had been removed, Rimsky ran back to the stage, where new miracles were in progress. It was then, or perhaps a little earlier, that the magician and his faded armchair vanished from the stage. The audience did not notice this at all, as they were absorbed by Faggot's wonderful tricks, having seen the compare off the stage. Faggot announced to the audience, "Now that we have disposed of that old bore, we shall open a shop for the ladies." In a moment, half the stage was covered with Persian carpets, some huge mirrors and a row of showcases, in which the audience was astounded to see a collection of Parisian dresses that were the last word in chic. In other showcases were hundreds of ladies' hats, some with feathers and some without, hundreds of pairs of shoes, black shoes, white shoes, yellow shoes, leather shoes, satin shoes, suede shoes, buckled shoes, and shoes studded with costume jewellery. Beside the shoes, there were flacons of scent, piles of handbags made of buckskin, satin and silk, and next to them piles of gilt lipstick holders. A red-haired girl in a black evening dress who had suddenly appeared from nowhere, her beauty only marked by a curious scar on her neck, smiled from the showcases with a proprietorial smile. With an engaging leer, Faggot announced that the firm would exchange, absolutely free of charge, any lady's old dress and shoes for model dresses and shoes from Paris, adding that the offer included handbags and the odds and ends that go in them. The cat began bowing and scraping, its forepaw gesturing like a commissionaire opening a door. In a sweet though slightly hoarse voice, the girl made an announcement which sounded rather cryptic, but which, judging from the faces of the women in the stalls, was very enticing. Guerlain, Chanel, Mitsuko, Narcisse Noir, Chanel No. 5, evening dresses, cocktail dresses. Faggot bent double. The cat bowed, and the girl opened the glass-fronted showcases. "Step up, please!" cried Faggot. "Don't be shy!" The audience began to fidget, but no one dared mount the stage. At last, a brunette emerged from the 10th row of the stalls and, smiling nonchalantly, walked up the side stairs onto the stage. "Bravo!" cried Faggot. "Our first customer. Behemoth, a chair for the lady. Shall we start with the shoes, madam?" The brunette sat down, and Faggot at once spread out a whole heap of shoes on the carpet in front of her. She took off her right shoe, tried on a lilac one, tested it with a walk on the carpet and inspected the heel. "Won't they pinch?" she inquired thoughtfully. Offended, Faggot cried, "Oh, come now!" and the cat gave an insulted meow. "I'll take them, monsieur," said the brunette with dignity as she put on the other shoe of the pair. Her old shoes were thrown behind a curtain, followed by the girl herself, the redhead, and Faggot, carrying several model dresses on coat hangers. The cat busied itself with helping and hung a tape measure round its neck for greater effect. A minute later, the brunette emerged from behind the curtain in a dress that sent a gasp through the entire auditorium. The bold girl, now very much prettier, stopped in front of a mirror, wriggled her bare shoulders, patted her hair, and twisted round to try and see her back view. "The firm begs you to accept this as a souvenir," said Faggot, handing the girl an open case containing a flacon of scent. "Merci," replied the girl haughtily, and walked down the steps to the stalls. As she went back to her seat, people jumped up to touch her scent bottle. The ice was broken. Women from all sides poured onto the stage. In the general hubbub of talk, laughter and cries, a man's voice was heard. "I won't let you!" Followed by a woman saying, "Let go of my arm, you narrow-minded little tyrant." Women were disappearing behind the curtain, leaving their old dresses there and emerging in new ones. A row of women were sitting on gilt-legged stools trying on new shoes. Faggot was on his knees, busy with a shoehorn, while the cat, weighed down by handbags and shoes, staggered from the showcases to the stools and back again. The girl with the scarred neck bustled to and fro, entering so much into the spirit of it all that she was soon chattering away in nothing but French. Strangely enough, all the women understood her at once, even those who knew not a word of French. To everybody's astonishment, a lone man climbed onto the stage. He announced that his wife had a cold and asked to be given something to take home to her. To prove that he was really married, he offered to show his passport. This conscientious husband was greeted with a roar of laughter. Faggot declared that he believed him even without his passport, and handed the man 2 pairs of silk stockings. The cat spontaneously added a pot of cold cream. Latecomers still mounted the steps as a stream of happy women in ball dresses, pyjama suits embroidered with dragons, severe tailor-mades and hats pranced back into the auditorium. Then Faggot announced that because it was so late, in exactly a minute's time the shop would close until tomorrow evening. This produced an incredible scuffle on stage. Without trying them on, women grabbed any shoes within reach. One woman hurtled behind the screen, threw off her clothes, and seated the first thing to hand. A silk dress patterned with enormous bunches of flowers, grabbed a dressing gown, and for good measure scooped up 2 flacons of scent. Exactly a minute later, a pistol shot rang out. The mirrors disappeared. The showcases and stools melted away. Carpet and curtain vanished into thin air. Last to disappear was the mountain of old dresses and shoes. The stage was bare and empty again. At this point, a new character joined the cast. A pleasant and extremely self-confident baritone was heard from box number 2. "It's high time, sir, that you showed the audience how you do your tricks, especially the banknote trick. We should also like to see the compere back on stage. The audience is concerned about him." The baritone voice belonged to none other than the evening's guest of honor, Arkady Apollonich-Sempliarov, chairman of the Moscow Theatre's Acoustics Commission. Arkady Apollonich was sharing his box with 2 ladies, one elderly, who was expensively and fashionably dressed, the other young and pretty and more simply dressed. The first, as was later established when the official report was compiled, was Arkady Apollonich's wife, and the other a distant relative of his, an aspiring young actress from Saratov, who lodged in the Sempliarovs' flat. "I beg your pardon," replied Faggot. "I'm sorry, but there's nothing to reveal. It's all quite plain." "Excuse me, but I don't agree. An explanation is essential. Otherwise, your brilliant act will leave a painful impression. The audience demands an explanation." "The audience," interrupted the insolent mountebank, "has not, to my knowledge, demanded anything of the sort. However, in view of your distinguished position, Arkady Apollonich, I will, since you insist, reveal something of our technique. To do so, will you allow me time for another short number?" "Of course," replied Arkady Apollonich patronizingly. "But you must show how it's done." "Very well, sir, very well. Now, may I ask where you were yesterday evening, Arkady Apollonich?" At this impertinent question, Arkady Apollonich's expression underwent a complete and violent change. "Yesterday evening, Arkady Apollonich was at a meeting of the Acoustics Commission," said his wife haughtily. "Surely that has nothing to do with magic?" "Oh, madame," replied Faggot, "it has, but you naturally do not know why. As for the meeting, you are quite wrong. When he went to the meeting, which incidentally was never scheduled to take place yesterday, Arkady Apollonich dismissed his chauffeur at the Acoustics Commission. A hush came over the whole theatre, and took a bus to Yelakovskaya Street, where he called on an actress called Militsa Andreevna Pokobatko from the local repertory theatre and spent about 4 hours in her flat. "Oh!" The painful cry rang out from complete silence. Suddenly, Arkady Apollonich's young cousin burst into a low, malicious laugh. "Of course," she exclaimed. I've suspected him for a long time. Now I see why that 10th-rate ham got the part of Louisa." And with a sudden wave of her arm, she hit Arkady Apollonish on the head with a short, fat, mauve umbrella. The vile faggot, who was none other than Koroviev, shouted, "There, ladies and gentlemen, is your revelation for you, as requested so insistently by Arkady Apollonish." "How dare you hit Arkady Apollonish, you little baggage?" said the wife grimly, rising in the box to her full gigantic height. The young girl was seized with another outburst of satanic laughter. "I've as much right," she replied, laughing, "to hit him as you have." A second dull crack was heard as another umbrella bounced off Arkady Apollonich's head. "Police! Arrest her!" roared Madame Sempleyarov in a terrifying voice. Here the cat bounded up to the footlights and announced in a human voice, "That concludes the evening. Maestro, finale, please." The dazed conductor, scarcely aware of what he was doing, waved his baton and the orchestra struck up, or rather murdered a disorganized excuse for a march, normally sung to obscene but very funny words. However, it was quickly drowned in the ensuing uproar. The police ran to the Semplyarovs' box. Curious spectators climbed onto the ledge to watch. There were explosions of infernal laughter and wild cries, drowned by the golden crash of cymbals from the orchestra. Suddenly the stage was empty. The horrible faggot and the sinister cat behemoth melted into the air and disappeared, just as the magician had vanished earlier in his shabby armchair.